Good morning, everybody. So first of all, I'm addicted to Twitter. So if you want to chat with me about this or anything else, I'm at Jessica Roberts on Twitter, the name you can't misspell. So let's get started. All of us are here because in some role or other, our job is to change commuter behavior. So that people drive alone less often. I'm sure we all agree about that. And at some point, we're all going to leave our homes again. I feel confident about that. And also the pessimist in me says that at that point in time, there's going to be a lot of driving. There are some reasons to hope for changes, but fundamentally, we're still going to have a lot of people driving to their jobs. So all of us will need to work even harder, even smarter to get them to do something else. So you have some kind of program that you're designing or that you're in charge of running. You send people an email, you drop by their desks, you have a welcome packet, you have an existing incentive program or maybe parking charges or policies you need to explain to people. And the question is, what's the smartest and most effective way to do that? And when I ask that question, I always say, well, what do behavioral scientists say? Because they're the ones who study exactly how people make decisions in real life, sometimes in a way that doesn't look perfect or rational. So that's what we're here to talk about today. And my assertion is that, in fact, when you ask is super important, and we don't pay enough attention to it. So for example, Bike Town, which is the city of Portland's bike share system, sent out promo postcards, as you know, so many systems like that do, to people who live near a bike share station and invited them to have a discounted first ride. And what they found is that people who had recently moved homes were 4 times more likely to take them up on that offer, even though everybody had exactly the same benefits to be gained. So it's great they did that testing and learned that. They can orient their program around that and waste a lot less money, frankly. But the rest of us might be asking, well, what does the research suggest? So the first principle I want to talk about is called the fresh start effect, which requires no explanation if you've ever made a New Year's resolution, and all of you have made a New Year's resolution, as have I. And for some reason, we're convinced that on the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve, we will shed our cocoon of laziness and bad habits and magically become a shining, beautiful butterfly of our best and most virtuous selves. And we're not alone in that. Behavioral science tells us that people, in fact, are much more likely to take some kind of action towards a goal that they have right after a temporal landmark that makes them feel like they have a new beginning. That can stimulate people to reflect on the big picture of their values and actions, and it can give them a sense of hope that even if they've failed in the past, maybe this time they can succeed. So as I already alluded to, the best studied fresh start in terms of transportation is moving homes. There's little research specific to transportation, but this is an area where there's good research. For example, I told you about the Bike Town study, but there are a couple of studies that are related to programs that increase transit use among people who have recently moved homes that have been quite successful, and also that university employees are able to decrease their car use as long as they care about the environment, but only right after a change of homes. So I suggest to you the evidence is pretty strong that orienting your program, whatever your role is, around when people have moved homes is a really good idea. So if you have an employer program, the easiest way to do that, of course, is focusing on onboarding orientation. We already know that's a good idea, but maybe revisit it, strengthen it. But I also suggest to you that if there's a way to find out when your employees who are already with you are moving homes and intervene at that time, that could be worth focusing on a bit more. The next area of research is on traffic disruption. So basically, disruptions to routine auto routes result in many more people finding different ways to get around. So there's research on an 8-day freeway closure that catalyzed a lot of shift to transit. And there are several studies related to the Olympics in different cities where regular routes were closed. There was a lot more congestion that showed people were or more able to shift to different modes. So really this makes sense. Normally habit, doing just what's habitual is the lowest friction and the most sort of comfortable action for people to take. But when that's not an option for you, you're going to have to do something that's maybe requiring you to have some cognitive load in your decision making and or experience some kind of discomfort related to a new action. So if we can swoop in and point them in the right direction, they may not only be open to it, they may be grateful for our help. So if you're an employer, look for these external disruption moments to your employees' commutes and swoop in and be helpful. If you work for government agencies and you're responsible for communicating about major roadway projects, for example, really make sure you take full advantage of the potential mode shift there. There's also research out there, it is not specific to transportation yet, but that you can create a fresh start, that there are many, many opportunities that if you frame it correctly and reach out to someone can feel like that fresh start. So that can be birthdays, especially major ones, holidays, especially federal holidays where people don't go to work. Any kind of temporal first of the week, first of the month, first of the semester, seasonal markers like first day of spring, I already mentioned the first of the year, and job changes, right? These all have good evidence and you could find ways to use them in your programs as well. Now, this next one is not yet well supported by evidence, but some researchers that I do a lot of work with think there's a lot of potential around reaching people right at the moment after they've had a good experience with something new. So for example, bike to work day, especially if it was their first bike to work day experience, or if they did take transit, maybe in response to some sort of offer, promo, or challenge that you had, would be a great time to swoop in and help, you know, invite someone to make that change permanent or do it more often. And that gets at people wanting subconsciously to feel like they're consistent. They act in a way that is consistent. And so somewhere in their minds, if they biked to work or took the bus to work, they must be the kind of person who does that. And they'll feel a bit more motivated to act in accordance with that. And also having had a good first experience can build a sense of what's called self-efficacy, which is belief that you are capable of making a change. Now, a bit of a caveat, everything I've presented only makes sense if your policy and if your policies and pricing are aligned with the same goals. So at best, these kinds of strategies can crank up the ROI of your existing reasonable or successful programs. But if fundamentally driving is still the easiest, cheapest, and most convenient way to get around, what I've presented to you isn't going to do more than fiddling around the margins. So a lot of these important decisions that inform what's called the choice landscape are out of our control, right? Like housing policy decisions, investments or lack of investments in active transportation, transit, cultural norms, right? But what is in your control generally, I'm making some assumptions about who's on the call, but generally is parking policy and pricing. So I'm going to be blunt. If you're giving parking away free to your employees, there's no reason to think that reaching out to someone on their birthday with a free transit pass is going to be transformative. Some people will say yes, but it's not going to get you where you need to go. So don't let this be an excuse not to do the heavy lifting on policy and pricing. Keep fighting that good fight. It's the most important thing. And then the kinds of ideas I'm bringing to you can help you, like I said, amp up that ROI. My final exhortation to you is don't just take the ideas I gave you and like reorient your entire program and be like, okay, my work is done. We need more research in this area, particularly related to how these ideas play out in transportation decision making. So I should have said, please don't take notes on all of these studies. These are just the studies I referred to in preparing this presentation. You'll get the slides. So if you're interested in learning more, here's your bibliography. But you can also see there's not a lot. I may have missed a couple studies, but I checked with some really experienced behavioral scientists, and we think this might be pretty close to it on timing, right? So we need more research, and I'd love to support you in figuring out how to do testing, proper testing and evaluation within your programs. And also, one of the great things about Ride Amigos is that they have lots of expertise on behavioral science and proper evaluation in-house. So Corey Tucker, for example, will be talking about that later. And you can reach out to her, you can reach out to me. There are lots of resources out there, but we really need your help on figuring out how the context in which these ideas work. And with that, I think we have time for a couple of questions.
We do indeed. Thank you for an amazing presentation. Our first question is from Mark Estat. He's saying that when people move is a potentially good time to reach out to them, would focusing on new hires at the employers we work with be a similar smart focus?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think we could do a lot more with that. I think oftentimes the TDM person is not sort of invited to be in the room with the HR people who are responsible for onboarding and orientation. And I would argue even this could extend into how we recruit for positions, and what statements we make about transportation and commuting programs that kind of sets the norm early. So I know sometimes you might have to sort of like fight or advocate to be included in that process, but I think if there's any idea I took away from today, it would be to focus on that.
For sure. One more quick question. This one comes from Courtney Schultz. Courtney is curious if you know of any research that's available that might discuss overcoming stigmas against forms of alternative commuting. In other words, I'm not the type of person to ride the bus, or I believe commuting that way might take too long.
Not offhand. I'm sorry. That's not what I sort of did a lit review for this topic, but not
it's an opportunity for new research.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure the answer is out there. I don't happen to know of it. I did come across a really interesting in-depth study from Scotland about why people don't ride the bus, and it did get into that, but which suggests some potential hypotheses that could be tested to address that. I'd also look to Transit Center for all kinds of information about what we can do to help people ride transit.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica. It's been awesome having you a part of Commute this year.